The Fastest Bullet Alive by DW novel. The location, outer space. The mission, DW going to outer space. The man, DW. DW knew only one thing about outer space. Anything you kill in space stays there for good. He couldn't remember where he had learned this piece of information, but it was about to save his life. 2 days ago, he had boarded a spaceship bound for the Global Alliance space station. Most field agents required extensive training to prepare for a mission in space, but DW was no ordinary agent. He had completed the 3-week training program in a mere 6 hours, taught himself physics in order to build his own spaceship, and most importantly, he could hold his breath for up to 30 minutes at a time. This last point was important because DW didn't trust the government-issue spacesuit he'd be given. It was common knowledge that the government filled their spacesuits with government air, a type of air subsidized by the government for public use, and so it had inevitably been breathed by all manner of degenerates, such as actors and theater performers and improv comedians. DW trusted air that only he had ever breathed, and so throughout the mission he had only allowed himself to breathe once every 30 minutes, so as to consume as little of the degenerate air as possible. At this very moment, he had just taken one such breath. He was floating in space, just outside the Global Alliance space station, fitted in his government-issue spacesuit. Not 100 feet away, a vicious man named Commander Huntington was waiting. Also floating in space, however, Commander Huntington was wearing perhaps the most elite spacesuit ever constructed. A fusion-powered nanoparticle exoskeleton made from steel and magma and designed by a man who didn't know how to love. DW grimaced at the relative puniness of his own suit as the government air rushed into his lungs, and he screamed as the horrific thoughts of mediocre community improv assaulted his mind. Commander Huntington smirked, aware of his obvious advantage. "I see you, DW," he yelled. "I see you in the pitiful equipment you've lugged up here. How could you ever consider yourself a match for my superior exoskeleton?" As he said this, the exoskeleton blinked in a pattern of glowing green lights and looked like a snake, which DW thought was super cool. "Face it," chuckled Commander Huntington. "You've lost. Outer space belongs to me now, and with my unstoppable technology, I will rule over it like a king." DW wanted to yell back, "Well, you can't do all of that stuff if you're dead," but he knew that doing so could easily shave 10 minutes off his breath-holding time. So he instead turned to someone who could do all the talking for him, his trusty handgun. When I read this, and I read the last one, all I thought about was Adam. DW is Adam. Also, I think I just heard him say "what" downstairs, and that's hilarious, but I don't know if that's what happened. DW pulled the handgun from its holster, pointed it at Commander Huntington, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet exploded out of his gun, raced towards Commander Huntington, and slowed it to a complete halt inches from Huntington's face. Commander Huntington burst into laughter. Well, it seems even the famous DW is fallible. My exoskeleton emits a gravitational field that will slow your bullets to a complete halt. Do you see now how useless it is to oppose me? I am invincible." And the lights on his suit showed the cool snake eating toxic waste and surviving. It was a terrible moment for DW. His gun had never failed him before, and he had fired it over 1 million times at over 10 million people. "You'll never be able to shoot me," taunted Commander Huntington. Your bullets aren't fast enough." Oh. The timing was really perfect. I said your name and I just heard "what?" Which fits DW. Suddenly, something sparked in DW's mind. The commander's words echoed in his ears. "Your bullets aren't fast enough." His mind stirred, and a memory of himself as a young man suddenly flashed before his eyes. "I said your bullets aren't fast enough, Warhead." It was the voice of Hollister Mad Black, DW's very first trainer. Mad Black had been the one who shaped DW into the heroic agent of violent justice he would one day become. Mad Black was a brutal teacher, unrelenting in his methods and incredibly specific in his background knowledge of your insecurities. And on this particular day, DW had spent all afternoon at the firing range while Mad Black berated him. "Your bullets aren't fast enough," Mad Black growled. "They're pathetic, and they've got all the intensity of a comatose infant dying of the plague underwater. Do it again." The young DW grimaced, his sweaty hands gripping the handgun, and he fired the gun once again with all his might. The bullet went fast, really, really fast, but it wasn't fast enough for Mad Black. No, yelled Mad Black. "Still too slow." That penguin has something. Okay. "My grandmother could hobble faster than this." Oops. It was a terrible moment for DW. His gun hadn't... Wait. I went back on accident. "And she's literally made of bricks." Do it again. DW was nearly at his limit. He'd been shooting the bullets as fast as he knew how to, and it still wasn't enough for Mad Black. DW slumped his shoulders in resignation. Mad Black got right in his face. "Now you listen to me, Warhead. We aren't leaving this pristine, privately funded underground training compound until you fire a bullet so fast it leaves me in tears. I've only cried twice ever. So stand up, point yourself forward like a man, and fire the gun." A wave of determination swept over DW's face. He threw his shoulders back, raised his handgun into the air, and focused his mind on the one single thing in the world that brought him true happiness and inspiration. DW. He grinned. As his finger clenched the trigger with every fiber of strength he screamed at the top of his lungs, "I'm DW." The bullet erupted from the gun, traveling at speeds he'd never known before. Hollister Mad Black smiled. "That's it, Warhead. That's what I wanted to see again." DW fired the gun again, this time with even more strength than before. His finger moved with velocity he had never known in his life, slamming down onto the trigger. "My name is DW, and I am DW." The bullet erupted from the gun at a blazing pace. Again and again he fired, each bullet faster than the one before. After nearly 9 hours of uninterrupted gunfire, DW, at last, paused and lowered his handgun. He turned to see Hollister Mad Black, with a single tear rolling down his cheek. "Number 3, Warhead, not bad." These words echoed in DW's memory as his mind raced back to the present moment, where Commander Huntington continued to taunt him, using the exact same words he had already repeated like 5 or 6 times by now. "Your bullets aren't fast enough to defeat me, DW." DW smiled. He gripped the handgun like you'd gripped a beloved friend, and pointed it at the commander, who simply laughed. "Go ahead, try your best." DW closed his eyes and thought deeply about the one thing in this world that he truly loved, the source of all his inspiration, the only man whose air he'd willingly breathe, and the only family member who had never sold his personal information to the country we're at war with, DW. A warmth filled him from within, circling his body before traveling downward into his finger. It was as though his finger was moving all on its own, unencumbered by any burden of life or physics, like a being of pure light traveling in an imperfect world. His finger squeezed the trigger with more strength, more velocity, more momentum than any man alive knew was possible. Nobody had ever fired a gun like this before. Nobody. With a deafening crack, the bullet fired directly at Commander Huntington. For a split second, Huntington felt a genuine shock that he may have been outmatched, and then nothing. No reaction at all. Commander Huntington was perfectly fine. "Ha!" he laughed. "You missed. The famous DW fires the shot of a lifetime, and he misses. Unbelievable." Huntington couldn't stop himself. He doubled over with laughter. But DW didn't seem to mind. In fact, the faintest grin danced across his face. Commander Huntington laughed and pointed at DW in mocking derision, until suddenly he was seized by a very unusual feeling. What was this feeling exactly? It was as though though the exoskeleton was gripping him just a bit less tightly than usual. In fact, he was starting to feel as though there were no exoskeleton. Not merely that the exoskeleton had been destroyed, but that it had never existed at all. DW had hit exactly what he'd aimed at. The bullet had erupted from the gun at such an unbelievable velocity that it couldn't be contained by the very fabric of space around it. It shredded through reality, setting quantum matter alight in its wake, and in doing so, it pierced the veil of time, a bullet traveling so fast it traveled backwards in time. Backwards a minute, then an hour, then a day. Years began to fly by, and the bullet lost no momentum. It soared through the years until at last it found its destination, the steel and magma laboratory where the exoskeleton had been constructed, honed and refined in its design by the scientists who didn't know how to love. Decades of work and research. Both books have made me laugh at least once in it, but decades of work and research had accumulated in the unstoppable exoskeleton that Commander Huntington wore today. Yet here at the start of it all, Dirk Warhard's bullet re-entered the fabric of space. It flew straight and true into the liquid explosive core of the facility, generating a spark that blew the entire facility to pieces. No exoskeleton would ever be constructed here. That much was certain. Now, in the present moment, DW watched as Commander Huntington grasped and flailed at the empty space surrounding his body, where the exoskeleton had been just moments ago. As Commander Huntington scowled at him in a combination of spiteful fury and suffocating, Dirk Warhard couldn't help but laugh. DW had always despised the past, but today it had saved his life. He knew it would cost him precious air, but he was too swept up in emotion. He turned to outer space and yelled, "My name is Dirk Warhard, and I will defeat the past even if it takes the rest of my life." Then he laughed and laughed until inevitably he had to breathe again. As he inhaled, the horrific thoughts returned of good-natured community actors just trying to get a leg up in their highly competitive industry. He shuddered in disgust, but somehow it didn't bother him. Here in space, watching as Commander Huntington suffocated, or whatever he was doing over there, DW felt certain that he had made his old trainer proud, and that was all that mattered. Somewhere in the past, Hollister Mad Black smiled ever so slightly and nodded in glowing approval as another tear ran down his calloused, stubbled cheek. Number 4. Not bad, Warhead. Not bad. Beautiful.